Hello everyone, it's Pastor Howie here, and I have a Tuesday edition of Lectionary Thoughts to share with you. We didn't do the same exact thing yesterday because it was Thanksgiving Day for our Canadian friends, so the lectionary provided us with a liturgy of things to consider from the scriptures regarding Thanksgiving for what God does for us. And we are thankful to be here, and we are thankful to have a lectionary, and we're thankful to be able to have the scriptures that God has given to us so that we might have time to spend contemplating the Word of God. And today we will contemplate Psalm 39, Job 28, verse 12 through 29, verse 10, and Revelation 8, 1 through 5. And so let's begin. And I've said in the past that, and I did this one other time, I took the portion from Job first, and then looked into what David has to say or whatever other psalmist. So let's do that again. So let's jump to Job chapter 28, beginning at verse 12. And Job is the one that's speaking here. And he began in chapter 27 saying his final things in the discourse and the discussion to his friends. And so his words last from chapter 27 through 28 and 29, 30, 31, and let's see how far it goes. Up to end of 31, and then another person who's not seen before named Elihu comes in, and he talks to all four of them, Job and his four friends. And then finally in the book of Job, God speaks. But today we come in on what Job is saying to his friends. And he says these words, "But where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? No mortal comprehends its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living. The deep says, 'It is not in me.' The sea says, 'It is not with me.' It cannot be bought with the finest gold, nor can its price be weighed out for silver. It cannot be bought with the gold of Ophir, with precious onyx or lapis lazuli. Neither gold nor crystal can compare with it, nor can it be had for jewels of gold. Coral and jasper are not worthy of mention. The price of wisdom is beyond rubies. The topaz of Cush cannot compare with it. It cannot be bought with pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds in the sky. Destruction and death say, only a rumor of it has reached our ears. God understands the way of it, or the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells. For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And he said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. Now, those words sound like Job has some insight that he's sharing with his friends and sharing therefore with us. And those things are confirmed in other places, like the book of Proverbs and even in Ecclesiastes, the wisdom of Solomon. But Job continues and offers his final defense in chapter 29. And this is how it begins in the first 10 verses. Job continued his discourse. How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone on my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. Oh, for the days when I was in my prime, when God's intimate friendship blessed my house, when the Almighty was still with me and my children were around me, when my path was drenched with cream and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil. So he's longing for the blessings he had before this trial came upon him. When I went to the gate of the city and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and stepped aside, and the old men rose to their feet. The chief men refrained from speaking and covered their mouths with their hands. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. And as I read this earlier, I thought to myself, what he said in the end of chapter 28 about wisdom is very true. But chapter 29 begins with him longing for days and thinking that God has abandoned him. And that's far from the truth. And God will show that to him later on in this book. But as we think about these things, now we turn to David's Psalm, Psalm 36, which was written for the director of music for Jeduthun, and a Psalm of David. And this is what David says. I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. So I remained utterly silent, not even saying anything good. But my anguish increased, my heart grew hot within me. While I meditated, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Everyone is but a breath, even those who seem secure. Surely everyone goes around like a mere phantom. In vain they rush about, heaping up wealth without knowing whose it will finally be. But now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope is in you. Save me from all my transgressions. Do not make me the scorn of fools. I was silent, I would not open my mouth, for you are the one who has done this. Remove your scourge from me. I am overcome by the blow of your hand. When you rebuke and discipline anyone for their sin, you consume their wealth like a moth. Surely everyone is but a breath. Hear my prayer, Lord. Listen to my cry for help. Do not be deaf to my weeping. I dwell with you as a foreigner, a stranger, as all my ancestors were. Look away from me, that I may enjoy life again before I depart and am no more. Now those are prayers based upon a man who has wisdom, a man described as a man after God's own heart. And unlike Job, David knows that God is always with him. And so David turns to him in prayer when his heart burned within him and he had to say something because of dwelling in the midst of the wicked. So he said to God. And that belies what Job did. Job had this knowledge about wisdom, that God has it, that God keeps it, that God displays it. But at the same time, he turned in lamentation over the days gone by and the current situation he was in, and he spoke as if God had abandoned him. David did not speak that way. David spoke honestly about dwelling in the midst of the wicked, and he spoke honestly about God's presence in his life, and he spoke honestly about his desires, as he says, that when God is disciplining us, sometimes we want him to look away, that we might enjoy life, because sometimes discipline from the Lord is not pleasant. But he did not think that God had abandoned him. And what we really need when we come to things like this is the kind of insight that we see that John has in the book of Revelation. You know what's literal about the book of Revelation is that John tells us what he saw. And what he saw were deep and mystical revelations of Christ. And he didn't see the future. He didn't see details that are reserved for the 21st century. He saw God. He saw Christ. He saw what is beyond the veil that we can't normally see. And that's what we need to look for. That's what David did. He turned to God. And that's what ultimately Job will receive, because God will speak to Job and open his mind and heart to things that are otherwise hidden, that he couldn't see because of his suffering. And so some of the things that John saw were things like Christ opening 7 seals on a scroll that was sealed up, representing the kind of things that are beyond our capability of seeing naturally. We can't see into the hidden things of God, but here John is shown some hidden things. And in chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, we see John speaking about when the 7th seal was opened. So when he, and that is the Lamb that was slain, but still lives, Christ, opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Silence in heaven. That means there are some times when it seems like God is silent to us. There are some times when we are silent in the midst of God. There was silence. Silence is not a bad thing. It is a time of reflection, a time of contemplation, a time to just be still, knowing that God is God. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. So the silence wasn't going to last because the trumpets were going to be blown. Another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer, with the prayers of all God's people on the altar, on the golden altar in front of the throne. So in that silence, we see a depiction of the prayers of God's people, your prayers, my prayers, rising up into heaven as incense rises up into the ceiling of a great cathedral. The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of God's people, went up before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth. And there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Though God may seem silent to us, as he did to Job, though we may know the scriptures that say to be still and know that God is God, sometimes it's hard for us. And so we pray, and there's nothing wrong with praying. But what we need to know is, even if our prayers seem to be receiving no response, it may just be that sometimes there's silence from heaven. But ultimately, God's people's prayers from their hearts in the name and character of Christ rise up to God as incense and produce results. Because God, when it's time for God to judge, when it's time for God to act, he acts. So we see the incense in the censer at first, the prayers of the saints rising up in the throne room of God, and then we see that same censer filled with fire and those coals cast upon the earth in response. So never fear. When things are quiet, when we're in the midst of trials and tribulations, when we're being challenged, perhaps when we're being chastised, it seems like God may be far away, he is always with us, and we are always in his presence, and he always hears, not just the words of our prayers, whether they're prayers we've memorized or whether they're just the stumbling utterances of our mouths trying to express what's in our hearts and what our heart's desires are to God. Maybe for ourselves, maybe for others. maybe for our nation, maybe for the world in general, maybe for the suffering. God hears our prayers. We're present with him. Our hearts are like censers filled with incense, and God receives that incense. And God is with us, and God will act on our behalf. He already has. The greatest act of God for us was sending his Son into this world, because he so loves the world that he gave us his Son, that whoever believes in him and whoever believes him will not perish, but have everlasting life. So may we live into that everlasting life. May we live into the words we've looked at today, and may we know that God is with us, even if he may seem silent. And may we know that sometimes we ought to be silent and just let God be God, because we can trust him. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless your day.